I never thought a simple envelope, unmarked, uncreased, almost weightless, could end a 30-year relationship with my brother. But that's exactly what happened. It was a Wednesday morning. Cool light filtered through my kitchen window, the kind of light that makes everything look cleaner than it truly is. I had just finished steeping my tea when the mail slot clacked open and something slid onto the foyer rug. I assumed it was another catalogue. It wasn't. It was a hospital invoice, addressed to me, for a surgery I never had. At first, I honestly thought the hospital had made a clerical error. It wouldn't have been the first time bureaucracy tried to wring a few dollars out of a senior citizen without checking their records. But when I unfolded the crisp paper, my stomach sank in a way I hadn't felt since the night I lost my husband. The date of the procedure, the department, the signature authorization. All of it looked alarmingly familiar, because the signature looked like mine. Except I didn't sign it. And the listed emergency contact, the person who had approved the financial responsibility during my unconscious intake, was my younger brother, Aaron. What made my hands tremble wasn't the $31,482 charge. It was the realization that Aaron had taken me to that same hospital 6 months earlier after I collapsed from dehydration. He had stayed in the waiting room, pacing dramatically, loud enough for the staff to hear how concerned he was. He acted like the world's most attentive brother. But now I was staring at proof that while I was barely coherent, he had quietly used my information to clear one of his debts. And he expected I would either never see the bill, or be too frail or confused to question it. My tea went cold. My pulse grew louder in my ears. I wanted to believe there was some reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd been pressured. Maybe this was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth. With Aaron, everything was always an accident, until you questioned him, and then it became your fault for bringing it up. I set the invoice on the table, smoothing the creases with my palm. The weight of the betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal, ancient even. The kind of heaviness that has roots and rings like a felled tree. I picked up my phone, and for the first time in my entire life, I hesitated before calling my own brother. I dialed anyway. He didn't bother with a greeting. "Hey," he said, sounding inconvenienced. "Can this wait? I'm in the middle of something." "Aaron," I said quietly, "did you use my name for a hospital procedure?" There was a long silence. Then a sigh sharp enough to slice through the phone. "Oh my God, Margaret. You're fine now. Why are you making a big deal out of this? You're fine now." The words sliced deeper than the lie itself. By the time I hung up, my hands were no longer trembling. They were steady, calm in the way only a person who has made a decision can be. I walked back to the table, picked up the invoice, and set it under the lamplight like evidence in a courtroom. If my brother thought I was fine now, then he was about to learn just how fine I could be, and just how expensive his carelessness would become. She calls a lawyer next, but what she uncovers is far worse. My name is Margaret Alston, and I am 65 years old. I've lived long enough to witness generosity turn to greed, charm turn to manipulation, and family bonds stretch so thin that they become almost transparent. But I've also lived long enough to learn how to stay calm when others expect panic, speak softly when others expect shouting, and gather evidence while others think I'm simply confused or forgetful. People tend to underestimate women my age. They mistake quiet for weakness, reflection for frailty, and patience for passivity. I learned, after my husband's long illness, that there is a kind of strength in watching before acting. A kind of power in listening to what people don't say. When Aaron told me I was fine now, as though my health scare were nothing more than a convenient story he could repurpose for his own financial mistakes, something inside me settled. Not broke. Settled. Like sediment in a glass of water. My life before all of this was simple in the best way. I spent my mornings tending to a small container garden on my balcony. Tomatoes, basil, a stubborn lavender plant that refuses to bloom. I read more than I spoke, walked more than I worried, and cherished the quiet I had earned after decades of caregiving. My retirement checks cover what I need, and I've always been mindful. My husband and I built a life on modest income but deep love. And when he passed 5 years ago, I didn't chase distraction. I let the grief move through me slowly, and eventually, I came out the other side shaped by it but not shattered. Aaron and I have always been different. He's 10 years younger, the baby of the family. The one my parents adored a little too openly. While I worked 2 jobs to help them keep the house, he moved from big idea to big idea, none of which lasted longer than a season. He has charm, a surface charm, just enough to make strangers trust him and enough to make family ashamed to admit they shouldn't. Still, I loved him. Still, I made excuses. Still, I tried to see the boy he once was instead of the man he kept becoming. But this, stealing my identity, using my medical emergency as an opportunity, this crossed into a territory I could not ignore. I made myself a promise years ago. If I ever had to confront wrongdoing, I would do it with facts, not fury. With documentation, not drama. So after I hung up on Aaron, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend to vent. I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Important Papers and began a new subfolder. Evidence, Aaron, medical fraud. My hands did not shake. My breath stayed steady. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. This wasn't just about the money. It was about dignity. When Mark needed money for college the second time, after he'd failed out the first, they borrowed. They scraped. They mortgaged. When I needed help leaving my ex-husband during our messy divorce, I was met with a polite but firm, "Your decisions have consequences, Evie." When Mark wanted to start a landscaping business, they co-signed loans they couldn't afford. When I asked them to watch my children for a weekend so I could catch my breath, "Well, Evelyn, you know how busy we are." I had always rationalized it. Families tilt. Priorities shift. No one is perfectly fair. But the discovery of the trust reframed everything. That money could have changed my life at multiple points. It could have reduced the financial chokehold of my divorce, supported my children's schooling, stabilized my retirement. It could have given me breathing room. Instead, it had been quietly funneled into Mark's needs, my parents' projects, home improvements, debt payments, all under the guise of protecting me. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was existential. In their eyes, I was dependable enough to take from but not valuable enough to invest in. And that realization burned. I spent the evening after the garage incident sitting on my couch, the documents spread before me like a timeline of misaligned priorities. Years of sacrifice, years of trust, years of loyalty, twisted into ledger entries marked miscellaneous. But the truth is, discovering the truth didn't break me. It awakened me. Because a fortress built on secrecy isn't a fortress at all. It's a house of cards. And the slightest breeze of truth was about to send it crashing down. The morning after my discovery, I spread the documents across my dining table and began piecing together the timeline. My grandfather died 12 years ago. The trust was established 6 months before his passing and activated immediately after. The original balance, $180,000. The instructions were clear. The trust was for my sole benefit. No one else, under any circumstances, was authorized to use the funds. Every year, the trust should have generated statements mailed to me. Except I never received a single envelope. Because my parents had them redirected to their own address. Transaction after transaction told the same story. Money drained steadily, deliberately, under vague memos or outright lies. $12,000, roof repair. $6,500, personal loan repayment. $4,200, tuition for M. $9,800, renovation phase 2. $22,000, consolidated debt. I stared at those numbers until my eyes blurred. The worst part wasn't even the theft. It was the audacity of their justification. "We were protecting you." My father's words replayed like a dull, mocking echo. Protecting me from my ex-husband? The same ex-husband they openly despised. yet managed to use as the perfect scapegoat for their own selfish decisions. My ex and I divorced 9 years ago, 3 years after the trust was emptied. Their story didn't just bend under scrutiny, it shattered. To steal from me while claiming to shield me was a cruelty so subtle it almost disguised itself as concern. Almost. That afternoon, I drove to their house with the documents carefully organized in a folder. I needed, to hear their explanation. Not because I expected the truth, but because I wanted to witness the moment their lies began to collapse under the weight of evidence. My mother opened the door, too eager, too bright. "Evie, sweetheart, come in." "No," I said, my voice low. "We're talking here." She froze. My tone unnerved her. I could see it in the slight twitch of her mouth. I held up the folder. "How much of it is left?" My mother's face went blank. My father appeared behind her, silent. I asked again. "How much of my trust is left?" Silence stretched thin between us. My father finally exhaled, heavy and put upon. "It's gone." The truth struck like a cold wave, though I already knew it. "All of it." He nodded once. My mother flinched, as if the admission physically pained her. I swallowed, slow and deliberate. "You used $180,000. Money that didn't belong to you. Money meant for your daughter. And you told yourselves it was okay." My father bristled. "We told ourselves it was necessary." My mother whispered. "We were helping the family." No. They were helping themselves. I took a step back from the doorway. "Then this," I said, lifting the folder, "is where the helping ends. Justice isn't loud. It's quiet, methodical, patient." I spent the next week building my case. Every statement, every letter from the trust, every email I had ever exchanged with my parents about money, every call log, every text. Their pattern wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. I scheduled a meeting with an estate attorney, a sharp woman named Mara Pearson, who listened without interrupting as I laid out the documents across a conference table. She skimmed the first page, then the second. Then her eyebrows lifted. "Evelyn," she said, "this is comprehensive." "My parents are thorough people," I replied dryly. She tapped one sheet with her pen. "They had power of attorney for your grandfather?" "No. Never." Her eyes sharpened. "They had trustee authority?" "No. The trust lists me as the sole beneficiary, with a corporate trustee. My parents were nowhere on the documents." She sat back slowly. "Then they had absolutely no legal right to access or use these funds. Every withdrawal made without your permission constitutes misappropriation of assets. Potentially fraud." The word fraud didn't feel shocking. It felt accurate. I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the garage. "What are my options?" She laid them out clearly. Civil action, restitution, potential criminal referral, a formal demand letter, a negotiated settlement, a complete and documented accounting of all stolen funds, and, should they resist, full legal exposure. She folded her hands. "Your case is exceptionally strong. If you want justice, you can have it." I exhaled slowly. The weight in my chest eased, just slightly. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. I wanted accountability. I wanted the imbalance corrected. Mara drafted a demand for restitution, a stark, precise breakdown of every dollar taken. She attached copies of every supporting document. Her language was calm but devastating. "Failure to remedy this misappropriation will result in immediate civil action." The letter was sent via certified mail. My parents signed for it 2 days later. An hour after that, my phone began ringing. I didn't answer. Not the first call, not the 5th, not the 12th. Eventually, a text arrived from my mother. "Evelyn, we need to talk." Then from my father. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Then. We thought you'd understand. Then. You're going to ruin this family. But I wasn't ruining anything. I was revealing it. Exposing the cracks they had spent years plastering over with excuses and silence. By the third day, another message appeared. Fine. If this is how you want to act, we'll see you in court. I saved the message. Screenshotted it. Archived it. Because the moment they chose hostility over humility, the final curtain lifted. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was exploitation. And now, it was documented. Something remarkable happens when you stop being afraid of confrontation. The world rearranges itself. People who were once intimidating become small. People who manipulated you begin to lose their grip. Truth becomes a blade you can hold without flinching. The turning point came one quiet Sunday morning. I was trimming my lavender bushes when my phone buzzed with a voicemail alert. It was my father's voice, strained, sharp, unsteady. Evelyn. This has gone far enough. Call me back immediately. We can resolve this privately. You don't want lawyers involved. Believe me. I deleted the message. Because he still didn't understand. He believed I could be guilt. That I would fold under pressure. That the old family dynamic, the one where I stayed silent and agreeable, still existed. It didn't. Later that week, Mara called with an update. Your parents retained an attorney, she said. Of course they had. My parents loved professionals as long as those professionals served them. But, she added, their attorney has already suggested mediation. I blinked. What changed? Mara's tone held a note of dry amusement. I sent them the full accounting packet. Once they saw how thoroughly everything is documented, well, they understand the gravity. In other words, their confidence dissolved when faced with evidence they couldn't reinterpret. I felt a quiet, powerful shift inside me. This was no longer a daughter confronting her parents. This was a woman demanding justice. Mediation was scheduled. I prepared meticulously. Dates. Transactions. Screenshots. Photocopies. Every withdrawal, every personal note, every contradiction in their story. The night before mediation, I walked through my home, touching the back of my couch, the edge of my dining table, the cool surface of the kitchen countertop. These small domestic rituals grounded me. Reminded me that I wasn't fighting for extravagance. I was fighting for fairness. I rehearsed what I would say. I am here for restitution. Not revenge. Not forgiveness. Restitution. That night, I slept deeply. Not because I wasn't anxious, but because I was ready. For the first time in years, I felt aligned. Certain. Balanced. Age brings many gifts, but the most valuable is perspective. I no longer needed their approval. Their love. Their validation. What I needed was the truth acknowledged and the wrong corrected. And I was prepared to fight. Quietly, firmly, relentlessly, until that happened. Mediation took place in a beige conference room with humming overhead lights. My parents sat across from me, older than I remembered, smaller somehow. My mother's hands trembled slightly. My father's jaw was rigid, clenched so tightly I could see a vein pulsing near his temple. Their attorney began with a polished speech about family misunderstanding, shared intentions, and protective actions. Mara let him finish. Then she slid a binder across the table. This, she said calmly, is a complete record of every misappropriated dollar. We will seek full restitution, plus interest, plus legal fees, unless an immediate settlement is reached. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. My father cleared his throat. This is excessive. No, Mara replied. This is lenient. My mother whispered, Evie, we didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't respond. Intent was irrelevant. Impact was everything. Their attorney asked to caucus privately. They left the room. Mara exhaled. They're folding. An hour later, they returned, deflated, defeated, drained of the confidence they once wore like armor. Their attorney delivered the proposal. They would liquidate a portion of their retirement accounts, sell the lake house, arrange a structured repayment plan for the remainder. Total restitution: the full $180,000, plus $34,000 in interest, and all legal fees. My father's face was pale. My mother's eyes were red. But I felt nothing vindictive. Just a steady, inevitable sense of correction. I signed the agreement. My parents didn't look at me as they signed theirs. The lake house sold quickly. The retirement accounts shrank. The repayment plan began. Their silent downfall wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, efficient, consequential. They had built their lives on the assumption that consequences could be avoided through silence and authority. But consequences, like seeds, grow eventually. And theirs had ripened. They stopped calling me. Stopped sending cards. Stopped pretending we were a family untouched by truth. In the months that followed, neighbors whispered. My brother distanced himself. Family acquaintances noticed the lake house disappearing from summer plans. My parents retreated into their home, a shrinking world of closed blinds, clipped conversations, and avoided questions. And I simply lived my life. Not vindicatively, not triumphantly, but peacefully. The truth had done what truth always does. It cleaned the wound. It cleared the infection. It restored balance. The months after the settlement felt still, not empty, just quiet. A quiet I hadn't realized I'd been craving for years. One morning as I watered my garden, my neighbor asked gently, "Have you heard from your parents at all?" I shook my head. No. And that's okay. Because the absence wasn't painful anymore. It was peaceful. I'd spent most of my life performing emotional labor for people who believed they were entitled to it. Parents, siblings, an ex-husband, extended family. But recovering the trust fund, and the truth surrounding it, had shifted something internal. I no longer felt responsible for managing other people's comfort. Least of all the comfort of people who had taken advantage of mine. The restitution payments began arriving monthly, small but steady. I funneled them into a secure investment account, treating it exactly as my grandfather intended. A cushion, a foundation, a quiet reassurance. I wished he were alive to see it. Not the conflict, but the resolution. My children, now grown, were supportive. My daughter hugged me one afternoon and whispered, "You taught us what boundaries look like." That meant more to me than any check. Therapy helped, too. Untangling years of complicated loyalty. Relearning that love without respect is simply dependency. Understanding that family can be a source of support, but not at the expense of your dignity. About 6 months after mediation, I received a letter. Handwritten. From my mother. She apologized in looping, uncertain handwriting. She said they never meant to hurt me, a sentence both meaningful and meaningless. She said they were ashamed. That the lake house had always been my father's dream. That helping Mark had become a habit they couldn't break. That redirecting the trust had started as a small decision and spiraled into something monstrous before they even realized. The letter ended with, "We hope, someday, when everything feels less raw, that you might forgive us. Not for our sake, though we would be grateful, but for yours." I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness is a landscape, not a switch. And I was still walking toward it at my own pace. But I didn't hate them. I didn't wish harm on them. I didn't fantasize about their suffering. I simply accepted the truth. They had made choices. And choices carry weight. My life, once tilted by their actions, was leveling again. One evening, I sat on my balcony as the sun dipped behind the river. A warm breeze rustled the trees. Birds called in the distance. Peace, I realized, feels like this. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of clarity. And I had finally, after 62 years, claimed that clarity for myself. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Silence is not kindness. And loyalty is not servitude. For years, I believed protecting my family meant absorbing their choices without question. I believed staying quiet preserved harmony. I believed self-sacrifice was the price of being the responsible one. But here is the truth I earned, slowly, painfully, and ultimately gratefully. You cannot save a family by letting it consume you. Justice is not cruelty. Boundaries are not betrayal. And accountability is not revenge. My parents told themselves a story, that I was fragile, that I needed protection, that the money would do more good in their hands than in mine. People can justify anything when they convince themselves the ends are noble. But motives don't erase outcomes. And good intentions do not repair broken trust. My grandfather left that money to me because he saw something my parents never fully understood. I was capable, responsible, trustworthy. And when I reclaimed that inheritance, legally, calmly, ethically, I didn't just restore my finances. I restored my identity. To anyone listening who has felt overshadowed, overlooked, or used, you are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to seek truth. You are allowed to protect what is yours. Doing so doesn't make you unkind. It makes you whole. In the end, my story isn't about $180,000. It's about rediscovering my voice at 62 years old and learning that courage is not loud or youthful or reckless. Courage is quiet, measured, intentional. Courage is saying, I will not carry what is not mine. I will not pretend this is acceptable. I will not let your choices shape my worth. My parents and I live separate lives now. Maybe someday, time will soften the jagged edges. Maybe forgiveness will arrive gradually, like the tide. But whether it comes or not, I stand firm in what I know. The truth, when spoken calmly and clearly, is its own form of justice. And justice, when pursued with dignity, is the most powerful kind of revenge. Thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing. And remember, your voice matters. Your boundaries matter. And your story, just like mine, is still yours to reclaim.